Welcome back to the AM show, and I am your host. Those who love me call me Lerato, those who know me call me Ali. And today's weather is a bit chilly, 100%. We are currently moving towards very cold weathers in South Africa. So bear with me. I have some coffee right next to me, and in today's topic we're going to be discussing innovative infrastructure financing for South Africa. How exciting. Now, if you know me and if you've read my reports, my research, you'll know that I am a big fan of infrastructure projects. I think it's one of the key ways to grow the economy, and it's important that we find new and better ways to finance them across the board. So from massive infrastructure projects to small infrastructure projects, it's important that we find new financial methods of supporting these projects, because they are the lifeline of our society and our development. Now, infrastructure development is a critical driver for economic growth, social progress, and sustainable development. Reliable and accessible infrastructure encompasses sectors such as transport, energy, water, telecommunication, housing, hospitals, schooling, and it's important in improving these so we can improve the quality of life for citizens in the world. However, today we're going to be focusing on South Africa and the investment required to build, maintain, and modernize all the essential infrastructure that's required to build a better society. Now, South Africa faces a significant infrastructure financing gap, with the NDP estimating an approximate need for 3.9 trillion rand. Now, to put that into context, SARS collected 2.1 trillion in taxes in the 2023-2024 financial year. So it's a big figure that's required to address the gap for all of these industries. Now, roads and highways require about 600 billion, rail requires about 400 billion, water and sanitation about 300, electricity 200 billion, telecommunications 100 billion, schools and hospitals 100 billion. And obviously these figures are going to change due to inflation and due to the cost of doing business. Now, traditionally, infrastructure development in South Africa has been financed through public budgets, state-owned enterprise funding, and bank lending. However, these traditional sources of financing have proven to be insufficient to meet the scale of the infrastructure investment required. Now, given the constraints on the government fiscal resources, the limited capacity of state-owned entities, and the risk aversion of lenders in the banking sector, there's a big challenge that we face in South Africa. Now, innovative financing mechanisms have gained prominence as a means of mobilizing additional private capital and optimizing the use of public resources. These innovative approaches include public-private partnerships, infrastructure bonds, blended financing, and green financing, and that's what we're going to be discussing in today's episode. Now, we have to really understand the constraints on traditional financing sources before we get into these innovative financing methods, right? Now, the public budget. So South Africa's government usually releases their budget in February, and the National government plans for the entire country, right? And allocates budget to municipalities. And municipalities have to then carry out these projects. However, the government uses a certain formula where it's based on the population of each municipality in order to administer resources to these municipalities. And as you can see, for planning purposes, this makes sense because obviously allocating a budget to the most populous municipality makes more sense. However, this doesn't allow us to build new centers or new cities, because if we're always focusing on existing cities and financing those, we will never have money to build new centers, and thus this is going to create a deficit for the future. Because currently, as it stands, Gauteng is the most populous province in South Africa. We have an estimated 19 million people living in South Africa. In Gauteng, excuse that. And South Africa has a population of about 65 million people. So we have over 20% of South Africa living in this very small province. And government has never thought to branch out and build new cities or new trade capitals. So it's something that, is important for the future, and just to take away the strain on existing bulk infrastructure. So let's talk about public-private partnerships. Now, these involve a collaborative arrangement between the public, private sectors to finance, build, and operate infrastructure projects. Now, usually, the private sector is responsible for designing, constructing, and managing the infrastructure project, while the public sector retains ownership and oversight. Now, this model enables leveraging of private sector expertise, efficiency, and capital to complement public resources and to share project risks. Let's think of the few, not even the few, but few prominent public-private partnerships in South Africa that have been well established and that have actually worked. So the first one is the Gautrain system. This is an 80-kilometer mass rapid transit railway system. It stretches from Pretoria to Johannesburg, and it's one of the most successful projects in my view. I use the Gautrain to travel to Johannesburg whenever I need to be there. And listen, it's easy, it's seamless, it's clean, it's inexpensive, and it's honestly one of the best projects in this decade, or in the previous decade. Wow, we are in 2024. Now, another project is the N1 N2 Winelands Toll Highway. And what happens in this case usually is the private sector comes on board, builds the road, puts a tollway, and government pays back the capital required or the capital used on the project. And after 20, 30 years, again, depending on the agreement, depending on the project, then they pay back the capital. Now, another massive infrastructure project which has a lot of, how do I put this? There's a lot of fugaziness about it. I don't want to say fugaziness, but the Medupi and Kusile power stations. These are the world's largest coal-fired power plants. Right now, these were supposed to save South Africa's energy grid and energy crisis. However, there's a lot of problems, to put it that way, with Medupi and Kusile. I know Medupi is in Lephalale. Lephalale is in Limpopo, and they both haven't been operating at full capacity since they've been built. right? And unfortunately, the capital expenditure used to build these projects has skyrocketed since. So these are some of the challenges that come with very massive infrastructure projects, but that's a whole nother conversation for another podcast. So now let's think about the key considerations for an effective Triple P implementation. So firstly, we have to have a robust legal system, right? Because when you have, and South Africa has very great laws. It has the most amazing laws in the world, right? The risk allocation and the dispute resolution mechanisms make it easier for project owners and stakeholders to really engage the project, because there will be conflict 100%, right? And we also need very strong institutional capacity. So well-developed public sector with expertise that's effectively structured, that can procure and monitor these transactions, is so important, because there can be a lot of fraud, a lot of corruption within these projects. And what you need, again, is transparent and competitive procurement. Now, in the case of South Africa and our corruption, I'm not too sure if that is 100% transparent and competitive, but I will give our government the benefit of the doubt, because we do have one of the world's most transformed procurement methods, which have allowed a lot of businesses to grow and to scale. So we have to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? And the fourth thing is appropriate risk allocation. So you have to effectively identify the risks, assess them, and allocate them between the parties. So who's going to take the risk of the capital? Who's going to take the risk of the operations, right, between the public and the private partners? Because this ensures the project viability and sustainability in the long run, right? So let's go and talk about infrastructure bonds. What are infrastructure bonds? So these are debt instruments issued to raise capital specifically for infrastructure projects, right? So several benefits include stable and long-term financing, portfolio diversification, and enhanced credit worthiness. And an example of these that we've had in South Africa is the City of Johannesburg infrastructure bond, where a 1.5 billion rand bond was issued by the City of Joburg to fund various infrastructure initiatives. Now, these included road upgrades, water projects, and public facilities. So in South Africa, the infrastructure bond market isn't as strong as compared to the PPP model or government funding, government direct funding. So we have to really further develop the infrastructure bond market in South Africa. So one thing that we can do is we can establish a dedicated infrastructure bond index. So this can improve the visibility and the attractiveness of these instruments for investors across the board. So for the retail investor, for the institutional investor, these can really help. We have to provide credit enhancement mechanisms. So the use of credit guarantees, insurance, or other risk mitigation tools can enhance the creditworthiness of these infrastructure bonds to attract a wider pool of investors. And we have to improve investor education and awareness. So if we can educate institutional and retail investors about the benefits and the opportunities presented by infrastructure bonds, especially locally, we can help stimulate the demand for these bonds. So, for instance, if we had Stokvels, for instance, investing into infrastructure bonds, we would see a whole lot more infrastructure projects actually getting financing, and the direct benefit is to citizens of South Africa, and the financial benefit is still to citizens of South Africa. So it's something to think about. Now let's talk about blended financing. Now, blended financing involves the strategic use of public and philanthropic funds to mobilize private capital for sustainable development projects. Now, this approach aims to leverage the unique strengths and resources of different financiers to de-risk investments, enhance the viability of projects, and to unlock private sector engagement. So, here's an example of how blended finance works. So, in the project lifecycle, right, you have to first ideate, you have to prove viability, you have to do the documentation, and that's just step one. So step one can be funded by, let's say, philanthropic financing, right? And step two is then getting the approvals, getting the bulk infrastructure, right? That could be funded by another financier. And step three is majority of the cost, so building the actual thing, right? It can then be funded by someone else, and then another financier can come on the maintaining, right? So build operate model, very similar to the PPP model, can be financed by different people at different steps, just to enhance the viability of the project and to de-risk it for all the investors involved. Right, so let's think of some of the instruments that are used. So there's concessional loans. So these are soft loans with below market interest rates, which usually offer longer repayment periods to improve the overall financial viability of a project. There's guarantees. So these are risk sharing mechanisms that provide protection against specific risks such as political, currency, credit risk to attract private investors. There's equity investment. So these are equity capital that can be demonstrated to demonstrate the commercial viability of a project and to crowd in other private investors. And there's outcome-based instruments. So these are performance-linked financing mechanisms such as social impact bonds that align the incentives and the reward of the achievement of the predefined development outcomes. So these are usually offered by government at the end of a project once it's done, to then continue to maintain the said infrastructure project. Alright, so South Africa has seen application of blended finance approach in several infrastructure projects, right? So one is the Transformative Urban Regeneration Program, which leveraged actually public funds, private capital, and developmental finance to revitalize and develop urban areas. So look around for those who live in cities. Majority of those developments, especially on the bulk infrastructure and the social housing, was blended financing. Right, so the last type of financing, or innovative financing, is green financing. Now, green financing encompasses the funding of sustainable infrastructure projects which are green focused. So these include renewable energy, water management, low carbon transport, and other environmentally friendly assets. Now, a prominent instrument in this space is green bonds, which are debt instruments used to raise capital for projects with environmental benefits. Now, the South African government has introduced several policies and incentives to promote the development of the green finance market. These include tax incentives for renewable energy investments, the green bond listing requirements. So the JSE has established listing requirements for green bonds to enhance transparency and credibility. Right? So we can mobilize private capital for green infrastructure, right, by developing a pipeline of bankable green projects, providing credit enhancement mechanisms, for example, the JSE listing requirements, by engaging with institutional investors, right, such as pension funds, insurance companies, and other institutional investors to increase the allocation of their funding to sustainable infrastructure projects. Right, so by leveraging these innovative mechanisms, South Africa can genuinely unlock additional resources and optimize the use of public financing to bridge the infrastructure gap in South Africa. So, once we have all these types of financing, the green financing to the triple Ps, to blended financing and infrastructure bonds, the next step is to create an enabling environment. Right? Now, there's some critical components to creating an enabling environment, which include regulatory and policy framework planning, capacity building and institutional strengthening, and creating investor confidence and risk mitigation. Right? Now, the successful implementation and widespread adoption of these innovative mechanisms will require this enabling environment. So, South Africa has great frameworks, from the PPP regulation to the bond market regulation to the green finance regulation, and we've published a report to get into more detail about this, and you can find this report at inthemorning.co.za. I mean, in the am.co.za. In the Morning is our hosting partners, and this gives me a chance to tell you more about our hosting services. So, are you an entrepreneur and you're looking for the correct type of hosting? Well, at inthemorning.co.za, we offer 3 months of free hosting for all new registered domains. That's right, 3 months of free hosting for all new registered domains. Our packages start from 99 Rand for professional emails to 199 for websites and emails. So, inthemorning.co.za. So, the effective implementation of these innovative financing mechanisms will require strong institutional capacity within the public and the private sector. Now, this includes the development of specialized skills, knowledge, and organizational capacity to identify, structure, and manage these complex transactions. Now, in South Africa, capacity building and institutional strengthening initiatives are crucial to addressing the following areas. Firstly, we need to get the project development teams right. So we need to equip the public sector and the project teams with the necessary expertise to effectively structure, procure, and monitor some of these financing arrangements, right? Number 2, we need to strengthen the capabilities of our financial institutions and financial intermediaries, right? So we can develop and market some of these financing methods, right? Number 3, we're going to need oversight bodies. So you're going to have to enhance the capacity of these bodies to effectively monitor and evaluate and provide guidance on the implementation of some of these financing mechanisms, right? So if we can achieve capacity building and institutional strengthening, then we can easily use these mechanisms to raise capital. Now, one thing which is key to unlocking all of these things, right? So we can have a framework, we can have a capacity building, we can have strong institutions. But if we don't have investor confidence and risk mitigation, then you can't raise capital. So attracting private investment for innovative infrastructure financing requires very strong investor confidence, because investors can go anywhere in the world. They are looking for return on investment, right? And there are perceived risks, right? So politically, in the society, the currency, that need to be addressed, right? Especially with infrastructure projects, because the payback period is so long. So to enhance investor confidence and to facilitate, the flow of private capital, we need to do the following. Number one, risk mitigation instruments. So we have to deploy credit enhancement tools such as partial risk guarantees, currency hedging mechanisms, and investment insurance to provide protection against specific risks. Right? We have to have transparent and competitive procurement, especially on the building side. So we genuinely have to procure transparently. Otherwise, colluding and corruption is going to be at an all-time high. And we have to improve stakeholder engagement and communication. So engaging proactively with the investment community to communicate benefits, the risks, and the frameworks is so important, because this improves the investor confidence and their understanding and the trusts of the projects, of the risks, of the frameworks. And we can establish so much if we get this right. And on that end, we are building community, and it's a investment listing platform where project owners can list their projects to increase the visibility of their projects for financing. And we've closed one deal, and this was a restaurant in Pele where we raised over 300,000 for the specific project. And the one thing that I'm realizing, especially with project owners, is they are so keen on just listing their projects, but they have to really do project preparation, so the planning, the risk mitigation, the research, just to really see the sustainability of some of these projects, So if you're interested in listing your project, hit us up at info@community.co.za, and we'll list your project on Community. We offer business planning services, financial modeling, market research, project preparation, and you can get, these checks right. Now, we've spoken a lot about some of these financing mechanisms, and as we've spoken about them this entire podcast, we'd like some of your comments. If you're listening from YouTube, please comment in the comment section. If you're listening on Spotify, in the comment section, I think it has a comment section, not too sure. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please just hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, at Ali Masubelele. Let's chat about this. I'm very passionate about finding innovative methods just to solve the infrastructure financing gap, because I understand how far we are from achieving the ideal society. And achieving that ideal society is going to require us building more things, better things at a rapid rate, and just really making South Africa better. Thank you so much for tuning in to the AM show. This is episode 3, and I think you guys can kind of see where this ties up with the Ivory Route. So the Ivory Route was our first episode where we discussed the new financial strategic economic zone in South Africa, and we're just trying to offer solutions for the government, for private sector, to really move the African continent forward. Right, so thank you so much for tuning in. We're excited for the next episode, and yeah, have a lovely day.